Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving deep into human motivation today and using Chapter 11 from your psychology textbook as our guide.
Should be a fascinating deep dive.
It really should be. This chapter is packed with information about everything from basic drives like hunger and sex to more complex social needs like belonging and achievement.
It's amazing to think how much our lives are driven by these underlying forces.
Totally. And we'll uncover some pretty fascinating insights and real-world examples along the way.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that's always struck me about human motivation
Yeah.
is that even in the face of really tough challenges, people can achieve incredible things. Take the story of Chris Klein.
Chris Klein, okay.
He was born with cerebral palsy, which severely limited his physical abilities.
Wow.
Yet he was so determined to live a full life. Imagine using only your left foot to operate a wheelchair, to communicate,
Wow.
and even graduate college. He went on to become an inspirational speaker, proving that motivation can truly conquer adversity.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Such a powerful example. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of hunger, sex, and belonging,
Right.
let's start with the basics. How do psychologists even define motivation? It's got to be more than just willpower, right?
It is way more. Motivation is basically the drive that gets us going, that keeps us going, and that directs our behavior toward a goal.
Okay.
Think of it like the energy that fuels our actions.
Okay, that makes sense. This chapter mentions a bunch of different theories about what drives that energy, though.
Right.
We've got instinct theory, drive reduction theory, arousal theory, even Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it can seem overwhelming, but let's take it one step at a time.
Okay.
So instinct theory basically says that some of our behaviors are pre-programmed, kind of like a bird instinctively building a nest.
Oh, okay.
But while humans have a few basic instincts, like a baby's rooting reflex,
Right.
most of our behavior is way more complex than that.
We're not just robots on autopilot. Okay, so then what about this drive reduction theory? What's that all about?
Well, drive reduction theory is all about our biological needs.
Okay.
And how we're always striving for a state of balance. That balance that's called homeostasis?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Imagine your body's like a room thermostat
Okay.
that's constantly adjusting to maintain a comfy temperature.
Right.
So when you're hungry, your blood sugar drops, and your body creates this drive, like hunger,
Yeah.
to push you to eat and restore that balance.
Like when the smell of pizza suddenly makes you crave it, even if you weren't even hungry a minute ago.
Exactly. But then we have arousal theory,
Right?
which kind of seems to contradict this idea of always trying to reduce our needs.
Yeah. What's that all about?
So arousal theory suggests that we're also motivated to seek out stimulation and excitement.
Okay.
Think about why people climb mountains or ride roller coasters or even watch those scary movies.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot, the optimal level of arousal.
Okay. That keeps us engaged and feeling alive.
Like that famous mountain climber, what was his name? George Mallory?
Yes. George Mallory.
Who climbed Mount Everest, quote, because it's there. He wasn't trying to reduce a need, he was seeking a challenge.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the Yerkes-Dodson law, it actually states that we perform best at moderate levels of arousal.
Oh.
Too little, and we're bored, we lack motivation.
Right.
But too much, and we get overwhelmed and anxious, which isn't good either.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's like when you're taking a test, right? A little bit of nerves can help you focus, but if you're too anxious, you might just freeze up. So where does Maslow's hierarchy of needs fit into all of this?
So Maslow's theory is kind of like a pyramid.
Oh, okay, a pyramid.
At the bottom, you've got our most basic physiological needs, like food, water, shelter.
Right.
Once those are met, we can move up to needs for safety and security,
Okay.
then belonging and love,
Yep.
followed by esteem.
And finally, at the top, self-actualization, which is all about reaching our full potential.
So basically, we need to take care of those lower level needs
Right.
before we can even think about the higher level stuff.
Exactly. And there's research on life satisfaction around the world that supports Maslow's hierarchy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In poorer nations, where basic needs aren't always met,
Right.
financial security is a huge predictor of happiness. But in wealthier nations where those needs are generally met, social connections become more important for happiness.
That's interesting. It highlights how interconnected our needs are. Now let's dive into a specific drive, hunger.
Okay, hunger.
This chapter mentions a study, a really powerful one by Ansel Keys.
Yeah.
during World War II,
World War II, right?
where you put volunteers on this severely restricted diet. What happened?
These men became completely fixated on food. They'd talk about it constantly. They would daydream about meals, even collected recipes. It showed how much hunger can take over our thoughts and behavior.
Wow, that's intense. It's not just an empty stomach that triggers hunger, though, right?
Yeah, not at all.
There's this whole interplay of hormones and brain activity involved.
You're right. The brain, specifically the hypothalamus, plays a critical role in regulating hunger.
Okay.
It monitors your body's energy levels, kind of like a fuel gauge,
Okay.
and sends out signals to either increase or decrease your appetite.
So are there actual hormones that tell us to eat or stop eating?
Absolutely. Think of your body like an orchestra,
Oh.
and the hormones are the instruments.
Got it.
When your stomach's empty, ghrelin, that's a hormone,
Yeah.
is like the loud trumpet blaring, feed me.
Okay, like that.
But after you eat, leptin's the gentle flute saying, okay, we're good. Insulin also helps regulate blood sugar levels, keeping everything in harmony.
Oh, that's a great analogy. What about this set point I've heard about? Does our body really have a predetermined weight it tries to maintain?
There is some truth to the idea of a preferred weight range for our bodies,
Okay.
but it's not a fixed number. It's more like a settling point,
Right.
influenced by lifestyle choices and environment. Think of it as a range, not a specific target.
Phew, okay. That makes me feel a little bit better. But our thoughts and emotions play a role in hunger too, right?
Absolutely. Our memory of eating, our culture and environment, even our mood can impact what we choose to eat and how much.
So it's not just about physical hunger. It's about the whole picture.
That's so interesting. Speaking of powerful drives, let's move on to another one that's a bit more exciting. Sexual motivation.
Okay, yeah, let's dive into that.
How does sexual motivation even differ from a basic need, like hunger? I mean, we won't die without sex, right?
Right, you won't die from a lack of sex, though it might feel that way sometimes. But unlike hunger, sexual motivation isn't just about survival. It's essential for continuing our species, of course, but it's also influenced by a complex mix of biological, psychological, and social factors.
I've always wondered how much of it is driven by hormones. Like, I know they play a role, but how big of a role are we talking? Hormones are definitely key players, especially testosterone in men and estrogen in women. They influence us throughout life, from prenatal development to puberty to sexual desire and behavioral.
So, like, during puberty, we get this surge of hormones, and boom, we're suddenly interested in sex. What about after that? Do hormone levels stay constant?
For most mammals, female hormone levels actually go up and down throughout their cycle, peaking during ovulation.
Oh, interesting.
This usually leads to, increased sexual receptivity.
So is that the same for humans?
In humans, it's a bit trickier. Some research suggests that women might have a little more sexual desire around ovulation.
Okay.
But it's not as straightforward as with other animals. Our thoughts and emotions, our cultural context, they all play a big role too.
It's not just biology running the show.
Exactly.
What about those psychological factors you mentioned? How do they fit in?
Well, have you ever felt, turned on by a certain scent or a piece of music?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Or even just a thought? That's your mind at work? Our fantasies, our personal experiences, even cultural norms can really impact what we find arousing and how we express our sexuality.
It's fascinating how much our brains influence our desire.
Yeah.
So it's not just about our bodies.
Right.
It's about this whole package, right? Our minds, our bodies, and the social world around us. This is really interesting.
It is.
But before we go any further, can you explain what this sexual response cycle is that I keep hearing about?
Of course. Way back in the 1960s, researchers Masters and Johnson did this groundbreaking work on human sexuality.
Oh, yeah. Masters and Johnson.
They actually observed people's physiological responses during sexual activity.
Wow.
And identified 4 distinct stages: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution.
Okay, so walk me through those stages. What actually happens, physically, during each one?
Okay, so during the excitement phase, blood flow increases to the genital areas, causing swelling and lubrication. It's that initial getting things going stage.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Next is the plateau phase, where that excitement peaks. Breathing gets faster, heart rate goes up, muscles tense in anticipation of orgasm.
Oh, wow.
Then comes the big finish, orgasm,
Right.
which involves involuntary muscle contractions throughout the body and a feeling of intense pleasure and release.
Okay.
It's really interesting that the physiological experience of orgasm is pretty similar for men and women, even though the outward signs might look different.
That is interesting. What happens after all that excitement?
Well, after orgasm, the body slowly returns to its unaroused state
Okay.
during the resolution phase. Men usually experience a refractory period where they can't have another orgasm for a bit.
Right, right.
But women have a much shorter refractory period and can potentially experience multiple orgasms in a row.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we've talked about the stages, but what happens when things don't go as planned? I know there can sometimes be, like, problems with the sexual response cycle.
Yes, unfortunately, sexual dysfunctions can happen
Right.
that make it difficult to become aroused or function sexually. These issues can range from a lack of desire to difficulty achieving orgasm.
Are these problems common?
They're more common than you might think, but there are effective treatments, both psychological and medical.
Okay.
It's important for people to remember that help is available.
That's really good to know. Before we move on, I do want to mention sexually transmitted infections, or STIs.
Yes, good point.
They're a serious concern, especially for younger people.
Absolutely. It's vital to practice safe sex and get tested regularly to protect yourself and your partner.
Condoms are so important for preventing STIs, and knowing your status is essential.
Couldn't agree more.
It's a conversation we need to be having more openly and honestly. Okay, now I want to talk about something that's always been so fascinating to me. Sexual orientation is such a fundamental part of who we are.
It is.
But where do these attractions come from? Is it nature, is it nurture, or some kind of combo?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Current research points to a biological basis for sexual orientation. Okay.
Studies on twins, family patterns, and even brain differences suggest that sexual orientation is not a choice.
That's what I've always believed, but there are still so many misconceptions out there.
I know. One of the biggest is that homosexuality is caused by bad parenting or some kind of traumatic experience.
Yeah.
But research has consistently shown that theory, along with many others related to environmental influences on sexual orientation, just isn't true.
So if it's not about our upbringing, then what is it about? What does the research say?
Research suggests several factors probably play a role.
Okay.
One study found that a part of the brain connected to sexual behavior actually showed size differences between gay and straight men.
Interesting.
Other studies have shown that the brains of gay and straight people respond differently to sex-related stimuli.
Okay, so there are actual differences in brain structure and function. What about genetics? Do they play a role?
Yes, twin studies have shown that if one identical twin is gay, the other is more likely to be gay as well. That points to a genetic influence.
And then there's this fascinating thing called the older brother effect.
The older brother effect, what's that?
It means that men with older brothers are slightly more likely to be gay.
Wow, I've never heard of that. Why would having older brothers even matter?
We don't know exactly why, but it suggests that maybe the prenatal environment influences sexual orientation. Perhaps something happens during pregnancy that affects how sexual orientation develops later in life.
So it seems like there's a lot of evidence pointing to a biological basis, but does that mean that the environment plays no role at all?
While there's no evidence that, like, how you're raised or social influences can change someone's sexual orientation, it is possible that environmental factors could interact with biological predispositions in ways we don't fully understand yet.
Makes sense. It's complicated.
It is, and it needs more.
It's so important to remember that sexual orientation is a spectrum, and there's a lot of diversity within categories like gay, straight, and bisexual.
Absolutely. And what really matters is that people feel free to express their sexuality without facing judgment or discrimination.
Yes, totally agree.
Understanding the science behind sexual orientation can help us challenge those harmful stereotypes and promote acceptance.
Well said. Now, I think it's time to switch gears and talk about our need to belong. It feels like such a basic human drive.
It really is.
And from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense, right? Our ancestors wouldn't have survived alone.
You're absolutely right. We're wired for connection. Our need to belong is deeply ingrained in our biology and how we evolved.
Right.
It's not just about wanting company. It's about feeling connected, loved, and accepted by others.
And those connections have a huge impact on our well-being. Right.
A huge impact. Research shows that people with strong social connections, they're generally happier, healthier, and they even live longer.
Wow.
They have better mental and physical health, and they're more resilient when facing stress.
That's amazing. It makes you realize how powerful those bonds really are. On the flip side, feeling isolated or rejected, that can be incredibly painful.
It can.
I'm reminded of Kipling Williams' research on ostracism.
Oh, yes.
He found that social exclusion actually activates those same brain regions
Right.
as physical pain does.
That's right. Being left out or ignored can trigger all these negative emotions. Sadness, loneliness, anger, even aggression.
Wow.
It can even lead to those self-defeating behaviors as people try to cope with the pain of rejection.
That's really sad. So
Yeah.
social pain really is real pain.
It is.
This makes me think about the rise of social media and how it's changing the way we connect with each other. Is it a good thing? Bad thing? Somewhere in between.
It's definitely a mixed bag. Social media can be a great way to stay connected with loved ones, find communities,
Right.
and get information and support. But on the other hand, it can also lead to social comparison, FOMO, and less face-to-face interaction.
It's all about finding that balance.
It is.
And using social media in a way that helps us, not hurts us.
Exactly.
I think that's key with so much of technology these days. It's about being mindful and intentional about how we use it.
Couldn't agree more.
Speaking of being intentional, I want to talk about another big motivator, achievement. What is it that drives us to set goals, strive for success, and push ourselves to be better?
That's where achievement motivation comes in. It's that desire to achieve something significant, to master skills,
Right.
and reach for those high standards. Think about those entrepreneurs building businesses, athletes training for competitions, or artists perfecting their craft. It's that fire in their belly that keeps them going.
I love that. I think we can all relate to that desire to achieve,
We can.
whether it's in our careers, personal lives, or just our hobbies. But what makes some people more driven than others?
Psychologist Henry Murray identified some key characteristics of those with high achievement motivation.
Oh, okay.
They're usually ambitious, persistent, and enjoy challenges. They don't shy away from hard work and are willing to put in the effort to reach their goals.
It sounds like they have a lot of grit. I've heard that's important for success, too. What exactly is grit, and how does it help us achieve?
Grit is that mix of passion and perseverance that lets people stick with their long-term goals.
Okay.
Even when they face setbacks and obstacles, it's about having that unwavering determination to see things through no matter what.
I love that. It seems like grit is something we can all cultivate, even if we weren't, born with a ton of it.
You're right. Achievement isn't just about talent or intelligence. It's
Oh.
also about effort, dedication, and the ability to bounce back from challenges. And those are skills we can develop over time.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the world of human motivation so far.
really has.
We've covered so much,
We have.
from the basics of motivation to the complexities of hunger, sex, and belonging. What stands out to you the most from what we've discussed so far?
I think what's really striking is how interconnected all of these different parts of motivation are. It's not just about, willpower or setting goals.
Right.
It's about understanding how our biology, our psychology, and our social world all work together.
That's a great point. And I think that understanding can be really empowering.
It can.
It's not about forcing ourselves to be motivated. It's about working with our natural drives and tendencies.
Exactly.
We'll continue this deep dive into motivation after a quick break.
Yeah. It really is fascinating how it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
All these different aspects of motivation, from our basic drives to our social needs, how does it all fit together?
Right. And speaking of social needs, we were just getting into achievement motivation before the break.
Yeah.
What makes some people so driven to succeed? Like those entrepreneurs we talked about, or athletes.
Yeah.
Is it just something you're born with, or is it something you can develop over time?
It's most likely a mix of both nature and nurture. Remember we talked about Henry Murray's research on achievement motivation? He found that folks with a high need for achievement tend to have certain personality traits like ambition, persistence, and a love of challenges.
Okay.
But these traits can also be developed and strengthened, through life experiences and by learning.
So even if you aren't naturally a go-getter, you can still build up those qualities.
Exactly. Think of it like this.
Okay.
When a baby is learning to walk, they stumble and fall a million times.
Right.
but they keep getting back up and trying again because they're driven by that motivation to master that new skill.
Okay.
That same idea applies to achievement in other areas of life, too.
I love that analogy. It reminds me of that saying, fall 7 times, stand up 8.
Exactly.
But I imagine there's some external things that can influence our achievement motivation, too. Like our upbringing, our culture, or even just like the people we're around all the time.
You're absolutely right. Our environment plays a huge role. If you grow up in a family or a community that really values hard work, education, and striving for excellence,
Yeah.
you're way more likely to develop those values yourself.
Okay.
Same with the people we hang out with. If you're always around people who are setting goals and pushing themselves, it can be contagious, you know?
Right. It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly.
So our social circles can actually have a big impact on how motivated we are.
Totally. And don't underestimate the power of role models and mentors.
Right.
Seeing someone else achieve something you want can be so motivating, you know? It shows you that it's possible, and it gives you kind of a roadmap to follow.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So we've got personality traits, upbringing, and social influences. Are there any like specific strategies or techniques that people can use to boost their achievement motivation?
Definitely one of the best strategies is setting SMART goals.
Oh yeah, I've heard of SMART goals.
It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay, can you break down what each of those means?
Sure, a specific goal is super clear, you know, not vague at all. A measurable goal has like ways to track your progress. And an achievable goal is realistic and attainable,
Okay.
not something totally out there. A relevant goal aligns with what you value and your overall objectives. And a time-bound goal has a deadline to keep you on track.
So instead of saying, I want to get in shape, a SMART goal would be more like, I want to run a 5K in 3 months.
Exactly. That's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to getting in shape. And it's time-bound with that 3-month deadline.
Okay, I can see how that would make you way more motivated to actually like do it.
Right. And another key part of boosting that achievement motivation is to focus on the process, not just the outcome.
Okay.
It's about enjoying the journey and celebrating those little wins along the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's easy to get so focused on the end goal that we forget to appreciate the progress we're making.
How do you think people can stay focused on the process?
Well, maybe breaking down those big goals into smaller steps could help.
Absolutely. Breaking things down makes the goal seem less overwhelming.
Right.
And it gives you more chances to experience those victories along the way. Each little win builds momentum and keeps you going.
So instead of getting overwhelmed by like climbing the whole mountain,
Right.
you just focus on getting to the next base camp.
Exactly. And another helpful thing is to surround yourself with supportive people.
Right.
Friends, family, mentors, or even like an online community.
Okay.
They can cheer you on, encourage you, and keep you accountable, you know?
It sounds like having that support system is really crucial, especially when things get tough.
It is. We're social creatures, and that feeling of belonging and connection can make a world of difference in our ability to reach our goals.
Yeah, you know, it makes me think about when we were talking about the pain of ostracism.
Yeah,
Well, the opposite is true, too.
it is.
Feeling loved, supported, and valued can be really motivating.
Absolutely. It's like we're programmed to do well when we're part of a group.
So we've talked about SMART goals, focusing on the process and building a support system.
Yeah.
Are there any other strategies that you found helpful for boosting achievement motivation?
One that I always recommend is visualization.
Okay, visualization.
It's used by athletes, performers, and all sorts of successful people.
Okay.
You basically create a really clear picture in your mind of yourself achieving your goal using all your senses, sight, sound, feeling, even smell and taste.
Okay.
It's like programming your subconscious mind for success, and it makes you believe that the goal is actually attainable.
I've heard of visualization, but I always thought it was a little bit out there, you know.
I know what you mean.
Is there any science behind it?
There is studies show that when people regularly visualize themselves doing something, they actually get better at it in real life. It's like their brains are practicing even without actually doing it.
That's wild. It shows you how powerful our minds really are.
They-
So to recap, some key strategies for boosting achievement motivation are setting SMART goals, focusing on the process, building a support system, and using visualization techniques.
Exactly.
Anything else we should add?
One more crucial thing is to cultivate a growth mindset.
Okay, a growth mindset.
This means believing that your abilities and intelligence can be developed,
Okay,
through hard work and learning.
so instead of seeing failure as like a sign that you're not good enough, you see it as a chance to learn and get better.
Exactly. People with a growth mindset, they love challenges. They keep going even when they hit setbacks and they see feedback as a way to improve.
Okay.
They get that achieving things is rarely a straight line, and they're not afraid to make mistakes along the way.
I like that it takes the pressure off of being perfect all the time.
It does.
Okay. So we've covered a ton about achievement motivation.
We have.
Before we jump into the final part of this deep dive,
Yeah.
are there any key takeaways you want to leave our listener with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that everyone has that potential for achievement.
Yeah.
It's not just about being born with talent or getting lucky. It's about setting those clear goals, developing smart strategies, having a positive mindset, and surrounding yourself with a good support system.
Right.
And remember, the journey is just as important as the destination.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy the process, celebrate those small wins, and never stop learning and growing.
That's great advice. Okay, we're going to explore the last piece of this motivation puzzle,
Okay.
the psychology of flow.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking all about the fascinating world of human motivation, and before the break, we were exploring this idea of achievement and how we can cultivate that drive to succeed.
That's right. We talked about setting smart goals, focusing on the process, building a supportive network, and embracing a growth mindset. But there's one more piece to this motivation puzzle I want to talk about, and that's flow.
Flow. I've heard that word before, but I'm not really sure what it means.
It's kind of a state of being totally absorbed in something, where you lose track of time and you're super concentrated and you're really enjoying it.
Okay.
Like, think about a musician who's just lost in their music, or an athlete who's completely in the zone during a game, or an artist who's so into their work that they forget to eat or sleep.
Okay, yeah, I think I've experienced that before. Like when I'm writing and the words are just like pouring out of me and I look up and hours have gone by, it's almost like being in a trance.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of flow, and research has shown that people who experience flow often are usually more creative, more productive, and more satisfied with their lives.
What?
And they're also more likely to hit their goals and do things that really matter in the world.
So how do we get into this flow state? Is it something we can control or does it just kind of happen?
There are definitely things we can do to make it more likely to happen.
Okay.
One important thing is finding things to do that challenge us, but not too much. Not too easy, not too hard.
Yeah.
If something is too easy, we get bored, right? If it's too hard, we get frustrated.
Right.
But when it's just right, it pushes us to use all our abilities, and we got to focus and be totally engaged.
It's like finding that sweet spot, between boredom and being overwhelmed.
Exactly. Another important thing is having clear goals and knowing how you're doing right away, like immediate feedback.
Okay.
When we know exactly what we want and we can see how our actions are getting us there, we're more likely to get into that flow state.
So it's not just about doing something you like, but also about feeling like you have a purpose.
Yes, you got it. And the last thing I'd say is that minimizing those distractions is super important for flow.
Yeah.
When we're always getting interrupted by notifications and emails, it's hard to really concentrate deeply.
Yeah, it's like trying to meditate in a room full of screaming kids. Not really a recipe for peace and quiet.
Exactly. So finding a quiet space, turning off your phone, and setting aside time to really focus on your work or your creative stuff can really help you get into that flow state.
So flow is about more than just feeling good. It's about reaching peak performance.
I got it. It's about unlocking your full potential and mastering whatever you're passionate about.
Okay.
And the more you practice getting into that flow state, the easier it gets. It's like training your brain to go into that zone where everything is effortless.
Wow. This has been such an incredible deep dive into human motivation.
It has been.
We've talked about so much, from the basic theories to the complexities of hunger, sex, belonging, achievement, and now flow. What final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say motivation is not something you're just stuck with. It's something you can change and influence.
Right.
By understanding what makes us tick, we can make better choices that align with what we care about and what we want to achieve.
Okay.
We can set ourselves up for success by choosing things that challenge and engage us, by building those strong relationships, by having a growth mindset, and by practicing techniques like visualization and finding that flow state.
Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, motivation isn't about forcing ourselves to do stuff we hate. It's about finding the joy in the process and tapping into that drive that we all have inside us.
That is such a great point. It's been so awesome exploring this topic with you today. I feel like I've learned so much about what makes us humans do what we do.
Yeah, me too.
And for our listeners, I hope this deep dive got you thinking and maybe even inspired you to dig a little deeper into your own motivations. Remember, motivation isn't about being perfect, it's about making progress. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to be your best self. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.